Okay, everybody. We have 32 participants this evening so far. That's wonderful. And as president, I will kick the meeting off with our land acknowledgement. The Mono Basin Historical Society acknowledges that our buildings and outdoor exhibition space are gathering places on the unceded ancestral lands of the Kutsadaka people, the traditional caretakers of their homeland, Kutsagwe. Now I'll get on to the short business meeting that we have. Are any of our trustees, do you have anything to say to our meeting tonight?
Duncan, yes, I have a brief announcement.
Please go ahead, Bob.
I'm going to also get my video out here. I want to announce that we have received a donation of 20 documents from Tim Sanford, a retired lawyer in Mammoth. And I'm going to hold this up. I don't know if you can see this, if this comes into focus. No, it doesn't look like it's coming into focus.
Almost.
Almost. All right. So historians rely on documents. And among the biggest caches of documents are oftentimes legal documents that come from court cases and other things. And for the Mono Basin, for Mono County, a lot of our documents are and were stored in the courthouse in Bridgeport. But in 1976, the courthouse was being restored and renovated, and a large number of documents that had been stored in the attic were taken to the dump. Vast numbers of documents, in fact. And a few of those were saved by people who heard about this and ran to the dump to save them. A number of these documents are in the Mono County Museum in Bridgeport. But Tim Sanford received 20 of these documents as a gift from a client, who was a deputy sheriff in the Mono County Sheriff's Department, who went to the dump and retrieved them. So we will be putting these on display in the coming year, along with the story of how and why documents get destroyed inadvertently. It's a good story all around. There's two or three good stories, but I just wanted to let you know that we've received that gift, and it comes from a cache of documents that were saved from being buried at the Levining dump in Bridgeport dump in 1976.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Any other trustees with information for us? Okay, let me just talk about the meeting next month. There'll be a departure from our usual December meeting. In fact, it'll be taking place on December the 9th, and it will consist of a holiday party here at Ellen and Duncan's house here in Mono City. And details will be coming out later. Basically, it'll be a potluck. It'll start at 6 in the evening on the 9th of December, and will include one of the films about three women who basically created the Mono Basin Visitor Center and got the Forest Service going in a much better way about 30 or 40 years ago. So we're proud to present that. Okay, any other officers who have any information for us? Would anybody else like to give us anything that they are aware of? Okay, I will now introduce our speaker for this evening. It's Chris Spiller, who many of us know, and she works for the Bodie Foundation, which is the non-profit organization that supports Bodie State Historic Park, also Mono Lake Tufa State Natural Reserve, and Grover Hot Springs State Park. She guides private tours for the foundation in Bodie and Mono Lake, and edits the foundation's biannual newsletter for members. She worked for California State Parks from 1997 to 2015, and spent 15 of those years at Bodie, presenting history talks and stamp mill tours. Her state parks career also included interpretation at Monterey State Historic Park and Big Basin Redwoods State Park. Previously, she worked for 3 seasons with the U.S. Forest Service, presenting natural and cultural history programs in the Mammoth Lakes and Mono Lake regions. And on a personal note, she taught me pretty much everything I know about Bodie when I worked as a park aide with her for 2 or 3 years, about 10 years ago. Anyway, Chris, take it away, please.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's great to see everyone here. And this is a project that I've been thinking about for some time. The show, obviously, is The World Came to Bodie. And we're going to talk a little bit about the diverse population. And again, why the population was primarily European American. Historical records that came out in later years reveal people from all over the world lived and worked here during its boom years of 1877 to 1881. So we're going to be talking a lot about the 1880 census, a little about the 1900 census. There was no 1890 census in many parts of the country, as there was a fire that destroyed it, which really is a big loss for a lot of genealogists, including myself, who I really trying to find my great-grandfather on that census if it was existed, but it does not, so we have to find other documents, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And this is by no means conclusive in the fact that I probably can't talk about everything in the short time I have, but I'll do my best, so here we go. So Bodie's became a state park in 1962, and so a lot of the history in the early interpretation was gathered from family members, and a lot of them were ones that had stayed there for many years and knew a lot of the old stories. And pretty soon, census records became available online, and it became a lot easier to find out things about people who lived in Bodie. And this is one of my favorite pictures. It's from the Mono County Historical Society, as you can see. And this is Bodie in 1879. And there's just, the more you stare at it, the more things you see. You see the 2 guys talking in the street on the left. You see how muddy the street is. So this is obviously probably springtime. And I can't really tell here with the poor exposure, but that might be even a patch of snow there in the middle. But you can see the wagon that's in motion over there on the right. And if you're wondering about the direction, everybody know where the entrance station is? Well, you're kind of looking down Main Street toward it. And you see a building, a little peaked roof there, the very end. And that is the old Bodie Foundry, of course, no longer there. And a lot of this is no longer there, but it's just a wonderful picture. So before we get going, we're going to talk a little bit about the 1880 census and why it's complicated. Now, you've probably heard that Bodie had 8,000 people, 10,000 people. Oh, some articles, if you go back far enough, say there were 15,000 people. And a lot of modern research has shown that it was closer to 7,000 to 8,000. And in 1880, the census recorded only 5,416 people, and the newspapers were up in arms. As you can see, there were many complaints among citizens that their names are not on the census list. And Duncan remembers us dramatizing this incident in a Friends of Bodie evening for our membership. And it is safe to say the population of Bodie is at least 7,000 instead of 5,416 as reported. So you can see that people are a little upset. Now, before we get into who was here, we want to honor the original caretakers of the land. And Mono County, as many of you know, is home to the Northern Paiute and Mono Lake Kuzetica. Before European Americans came to the area, the tribes were primarily hunter-gatherers, and they subsisted by gathering native plants, hunting game, and fishing in local streams. And they would migrate seasonally following food sources. And baskets, tightly woven with creative designs, were used for food gathering, storage, and cooking. And the Kuzetica used baskets to collect one of the tribe's prized food, and in the previous picture you saw that being gathered, the alkali fly pupa, kutsavi, and also for gathering of pinyon, pine nuts, and piagi, the larva of the Pandora moth. And this wonderful existence was impacted by the miners, farmers, and ranchers that arrived in the area after the discovery of gold in the Mono Basin and nearby mining towns. And soon the native people were uprooted from their traditional territory. The food supplies dwindled as settlers cut the forest for lumber and firewood, overhunted local wildlife, and destroyed meadows by grazing livestock. And native people began working in the local ranches and towns. Many found work at the lime kiln in the Mono Basin, loading sacked lime onto flat cars for delivery to Bodie, where it was used in brickmaking and later in cyanide processing of gold and silver ores. And as many of you know, native women were employed by local families as household help. Of course, we got a picture of the lime kilns there. Another favorite picture, you're going to find out I have a lot of favorite pictures. In 1880, our census shows there's 35 Paiute listed on the census in Bodie. None of them are listed with names except for one Captain Bob, aged 38. Of the 38, 8 are women. By 1900, slightly over 60 of the 119 Paiute listed are women, and the names are now recorded. And has anyone seen this picture before? It's a 4th of July picture, and it shows up every once in a while on the internet. And if you look carefully, they're all watching some sort of activity, and I can't see what it is, whether it's a tug of war, which was very popular, or it's a drilling contest where miners would show how fast they could drill a hole. But what do we see under here, under the wagon? Anybody got an idea? These are some of the native people who are playing some sort of game down here, perhaps a hand game as they called it, but they're having their own party down here while everyone else is up here. China. So discovery of gold in California and Nevada brought a lot of Chinese immigrants. There were already some coming in, but most came from South China, where the wars, civil unrest, floods, famines, droughts had impoverished the population. And California's gold attracted Chinese to various towns, including Bodie. Unfortunately, they were not usually welcomed in the cities and towns when they arrived. And this is just a picture off the internet showing them on a ship on their way. And this is in Bodie. And our 1880 census, which you remember had problems, showed 253 individuals born in China. And my suspicion is there were a lot more. A lot of people don't like to be found by census workers anyway. There was a language barrier. I'm guessing it was at least 300, maybe more. And all these people arrived and they want to mine for gold, but they were not allowed to join the Bodie's Miners Union, which kept them out of the $4 a day jobs, which was very high wage for the time. And some would try panning along Bodie Creek where tailings, that's the crushed material from the stamp mills, they washed downstream and they were deposited down there. And one of the most important tasks they did was they chopped and transported wood as there was no agriculture or trees in Bodie. So this is a picture on the north end of Main Street, and you can see the burrows are piled high with the wood, and they've gone down to 9 Mile Canyon, which surprisingly is 9 miles north of Bodie, and bringing that wood in to the woodlots for sale. And of the 38 Chinese women listed, there were no names recorded. Each was listed as China woman. And we have a picture here of a block in Chinatown, and for a later slide, I want you to pay attention to the brickwork there on this building. We're going to compare it with another picture later on. And if you know Bodie, you're looking to the west. This is Bodie Mountain over here. And the Chinese also found work importing fruits and vegetables. And a lot of you people from Mono Lake know that a lot of food was grown in the farms and ranches around Mono Lake and transported to Bodie. They also worked as cooks and laborers in restaurants and laundries, but not everyone would hire them. And some of those people made it a point to mention it in their advertisements. And I know this may be hard to read for some people, so I've got a copy of it here. This is the Lafayette Restaurant on Main Street in Bodie. Mrs. Enno Wilford is the owner. And the very small print there, the cooking is done entirely by ladies, no China cooks employed. So that's the kind of thing they were up against. Now, some more opportunity for work came along in 1881 for the Chinese. A narrow gauge railroad was built between Mono Mills and Bodie Bluff to bring wood to the mining operations in town. But the company couldn't pay the $4 a day as the mines were paying their workers. They were struggling to find workers at the pay of $1.25, and everybody thought that was too low. And over here we have a little article about the effort to hire laborers, and you notice that they have an advertisement in the Daily Free Press for 200 white laborers who are to be placed to work next Wednesday on the new road running to Mono Lake. And noting how little they paid, the newspaper reporter commented, "This is not quite as good as $3 or $4 per day at mining, but it beats nothing all to pieces." So they were hopeful that they'd get some more people. But the newspaper ads did not bring as many applicants as hoped for, but 65 Chinese showed up and asked for jobs. And the railroad company, working on a deadline, they hired them, put them to work building a section between Warm Springs and Mono Mills. And so this move was to avoid interaction with the white workers, but it didn't take long for the word to get out. And you can see here, anti-Chinese movement in Mono County, May 24th, 1881. And considerable excitement has been aroused here in regard to the employment of Chinese on the railroad line to Mono Lake. And at the bottom, though, you notice, while a mass meeting, and it doesn't say of who, was adopted, and there was a resolution that no Chinamen should be employed in Mono County. And then there was a meeting of the miners' union that was scheduled to be held that night. And so they were still discussing what they would do. And what they would do, well, at least some people, this article discusses how 40 armed men left early for the Chinese camp 30 miles distant. But the railroad people got wind of this, and they took their Chinese workers, took about a month's worth of food, and put them on the steamboat, the Rocket, and took them out to Paoha Island, get them out of harm's way. And when they arrived, as the article says, they found the birds had flown, and these guys showed up with not enough warm clothes, no food, and no whiskey. And in fact, there's even one of these articles talks about how they sent people back to get some whiskey. Delegation was trying to raise funds to provide provisions. And interesting last paragraph here. The crowd is made up mostly of irresponsible characters, and they have not the sympathy of the people here, nor of the miners' union. So that's kind of interesting. And another article, Sheriff Showers came down from Bridgeport. He went to the front yesterday to try to get the raiders to return home, failing in which he will read the Riot Act. I guess they actually read that. And command them to disperse. Well, finally the guys from Bodie gave up. And they didn't have enough food. They were unprepared for the cold weather. And they headed on back to Bodie. Supplies of provisions and whiskey were sent out this afternoon to assist the remainder to return down. They really needed that whiskey to get all the way back. And the war may be considered over. The hoodlums, now they're hoodlums, having no backing from the miners' union or the people generally. And what about the Chinese out on the island? They returned from the island, went back to work, and there was never any further trouble. And this was something that kind of surprised me, is you get the impression from reading a lot of Bodie books that, the 5-year period where the population boomed, that the Chinese were gone too. But in the 1900 census, there's still a Chinese population. Now, I admit they're down to 78. And in 1910, there's still 12 of them. Finally, in 1920, no Chinese show up on the Bodie census. And most of these men were continuing to work as woodcutters, cooks, day laborers, and laundrymen. And we have an actual picture of the census here, just seeing some of those people from 1900. Now, there were some other Chinese that arrived later, not in the boom period. And some of you may have heard of Sam Leone's bar, and it's still standing right there on Main Street. And this was owned by Sam Leone, born in China in 1879. And he ran several businesses in Bodie. He first operated the U.S. Hotel on Main Street, which was lost in the 1932 fire. So then he moved over to this building that stands today and ran a saloon and casino. And Sam is at the left in this photo. And if you look in the windows today, you'll see the slot machine, roulette wheel, and a piano, and a few other things. And later, Sam, always a businessman, moved down the street to the brick building known as the DeChambeau Hotel and operated a cafe and bar there. And I have talked to many people who said, yeah, I came here in the 50s and we met Sam Leone. And, my dad went in there and had a beer and had memories of meeting him. And this is something that I found in the last year, just sort of digging around. This is from 1931. I had never really heard of this fellow. They call him Bodie Tom. And he died at the Elbow Ranch on the East Walker River in Nevada. And it's titled "The Colorful Character of Pioneer Days of the Gold Camp is Found Dead." And he was 80 years old at the time of his death, and he was respected through the years for his honesty and integrity, earning his living by bringing wood to Bodie on pack burros from the high mountains. Tom had become a familiar figure to almost every resident of the famous gold camp during its better days. And he hauled wood to Bodie for many years, and with his savings purchased the Elbow Ranch several years ago. And in earlier years, he had married a Native American woman and lived in the hills near Bodie. They raised 2 daughters who later moved to Mason Valley. At the time of his death, Tom's wife had been dead for several years. And he became ill and moved to the ranch about a year ago and hoped his condition would improve so he could return to San Francisco, where he had spent his boyhood days. So that is about the last. So he was still hanging around there in the 30s. Mexico, and I wish I could tell you this is a picture from Bodie, but it is not. Pictures of the Mexican population have been hard to find. Maybe someday I will find one. But this is a picture from 1880. And this gets a little confusing. The 1880 census shows only 74 residents born in Mexico. But you read newspapers and other references, and they say that there were closer to 200. So the 74 total, that included 14 females, one being a 5-year-old girl. And talk a little bit about where most of them were from and what they did. A few of them were miners and others were stamp mill workers. But most of the Mexicans in Bodie worked as woodcutters, haulers, or wood dealers. Some of the so-called Mexicans were actually Californios, but the majority were native-born Mexicans, mostly from the state of Sonora. And they celebrated a lot of important holidays. Hidalgo Day in September was the major holiday, and it included several events, including a parade and horsemanship event. The Wanta Patriotica Mexica de Bodie, a Mexican patriotic group, also marched in Bodie's Fourth of July parades, and this is one of the Fourth of July parades right here. But we're near the front of the parade, so I don't think we're going to see them here. And newspaper accounts indicate that a lot of Bodie residents kind of joined in the fun. The horsemanship, Ed Luce, who was the first owner of the Bodie mine, and other town residents would crowd into the miners' union hall to hear speeches and music. And we've got a little story here. This was actually one of my Throwback Thursdays, and the little information about the 1879 celebration of Hidalgo Day. I'll just read you a little bit of it. The celebration started the night before with a Mexican flag raised on a pole at the corner of Green and Main Street. A large bonfire was built, and Alfredo Ontiveros was introduced to the large crowd by Onofre Marino, president of the Bodie chapter of the Wanta Patriotica Mexicana. They spell it different every time I find a reference. Ontiveros made a proclamation of independence, similar to that made by the liberator of Mexico. Music by the brass band and salvos of artillery from a huge anvil made the night one of patriotic pleasure to the participants. So the party's not over yet. The next morning, they have a procession of about 200 men marching down Main Street. The newspaper reported a fine-looking set of men on foot and horseback, the marshals designated by the rich insignia of their office. And American and Mexican flags were at the head of the column, which marched to the Miners' Union Hall, where a crowd awaited. More music and speeches followed, and Dr. Davidson, who had a Mexican-born wife, made an explanatory address to the Americans. And of course, he probably talked about September 16th being one of Mexico's most important holidays. And it was it's basically their Independence Day. And then they had two ladies that sang the national hymn of Mexico. And the reporter noted, this was exquisitely rendered, and to the lovers of good music was a treat they seldom receive in Bodie. And the article concluded, we are glad to note the united love of our Mexican fellow citizens to the fatherland. It speaks well of their intelligence and proper feeling for the land of their birth, and their celebration yesterday is a credit to Bodie. So yeah, kind of a lot of intermixing there. And we found a few African Americans. Oops, I want to go back. But there was one here very early before the boom period, and a lot of you have probably heard of him, William Billy O'Hara. And he came to Bodie in 1865 to manage the boarding house and be a cook for the miners working at the Empire Mining Company. And this was Bodie's first major mining operation. And this picture shows the beautiful brick stamp mill, and it was a 20 stamp mill. And if you're wondering where this is, it's no longer there, just a lot of ruins. But if you headed out of Bodie north, heading toward Aurora, you would soon come on these ruins. And O'Hara was born in Ohio. He had a pretty interesting background. He traveled west from the Mississippi River, where he worked as a steamboat captain. And on the way, he worked as steward for William C. Ralston, who would become president of the Bank of California. And if you want to look up him, he's another interesting story that we don't have time for. O'Hara first lived in Columbia, California, where he ran the Jenny Lind restaurant. And after the death of his wife, he moved to Aurora and then on to Bodie. Now, the Empire Company made $12,000 to $15,000 a month, according to the Mining and Scientific Press, a mining journal. It was a promising start, but things didn't go too well, and it closed in 1867. But O'Hara stuck around because they wanted him to watch over the property, and later on, someone else would buy the property. And he became very involved with the town. He wanted to help people who were trying to get started mining there. He would lend out money to them. And there's a lot of stories about his involvement in the big find at Bodie that started the rush. And Michael Pyatt, the author of The Mines Are Looking Well, says the most widely accepted version is that he accepted the Bunker Hill mine as payment for a defaulted loan. And he tried to sell the mine, but he could not find a buyer until Peter Eshington and Lewis Lockbird agreed to work the mine and pay him an $8,000 cut of the yield. And then the property was renamed the Bullion Lode. And in fall 1875, there was a cave-in at the mine, and they went to look at the damage, and to their great surprise and delight, they saw pieces of gold sparkling in the quartz rock there on the wall. And the pair soon sold out to San Francisco investors, and the mine was renamed the Standard Mining Company in 1877, and they immediately started work on a stamp mill. And that, of course, would be Bodie's most successful mine. And O'Hara eventually returned to Aurora, where he died in April 1880. There were large articles about his death. They hailed him as a foster father of Bodie, and his success in various businesses left an estate of $40,000. Not bad for the time. And I put this together. This is about 15 people who are listed as Black on the 1880 census of Bodie. And I wish I knew more about some of them. We're going to talk about a few of them. We have, where is Michael? No, Michael's not here for some reason. There he is, Michael Howard. And we're going to talk a little bit about Thomas Brown and his wife, who also does not appear here for some reason, but she supposedly was there. And but you can kind of see where they came from, and you can see what the jobs are. And a lot of hairdressers, a couple of children, wash house employees, a boot black, boot polisher, waiter, another hairdresser, 3 barbers, and a miner. Paul Cromwell was a miner. Now, this is a later picture, probably from the 20s or 30s, of the barber shop in Bodie. But you can see that not too much change, probably, from the boom period. Plenty of spittoons, those were widely used there. And by 1879, Frank S. Wedderts, who wrote the book Bodie 1859 to 1900, reports that there were 7 barber shops in Bodie. And he actually had a biography of one barber, Michael Howard, African-American, born in South Carolina. Howard worked in the cotton fields of Mississippi and later went to Texas, according to Wedderts, to assist Sam Houston, and later came west with the train that brought supplies to the famished army of Captain Fremont in 1846. And he finished his account about Howard as saying he was an avid Republican and addressed citizens of Bodie during the political rallies. And these 2 people I found out the most about. I was able to trace them. And one thing that helped is they actually stuck around Bodie for a while. While a lot of people left, Thomas Brown and his wife, Margaret, stayed for a while. And this is where we get into a lot of records that give us a lot more information than the census. Again, he's shown as a hairdresser on the 1880 census. The couple were born in Virginia, and they came to California in 1853 and to Bodie in 1878. And a city directory in 1886 lists T.J. Brown, hairdresser in Bath, Main Street. 10 years later, Mono County's Great Register of Voters lists him with a detailed description. Thomas Jefferson Brown, barber, 75 years, 5'9", tall, dark complexion, dark eyes, dark hair, scar on lip. And Thomas would die in 1898, and Margaret remained in their home in Bodie. And the 1900 census lists her as nearly 80 years old and working as a housekeeper. And at that time, she is the only Black person living in Bodie. And the Bridgeport Chronicle wrote quite an article about her. After the death of her husband, she remained in Bodie until old age forced her to ask for assistance. She was brought to the county farm August 21st, 1907, where she remained until her death. And she was buried in Bodie, October 18th, 1908, joining her husband, who was also buried there. So when I found this information out, this is something that will be added to our cemetery brochure. That's my first thought, because as many of you know, the Bodie Foundation did a lot with forensic dogs who found a lot of unmarked graves, and there's probably hundreds of them out there. And so we know, the more we know about them, the more we can tell these people's stories. And in case you're not familiar with the county farm, it was also called the Poor Farm, and it was previously the county hospital. I think it still functioned as a hospital. And somebody can help me on that if you know. It was located near the intersection of Green Creek Road and Highway 395, just south of Bridgeport. And there's a plaque there that tells you a little more history about it. Now we get into things that you have to be careful about. I used to say there were about 16 Black residents of Bodie. And the more I looked at this guy, I went, Indiana. And I finally thought, and his parents were born in India. Could that be a mistake? Indiana or India? So this is when you go to the actual census record, when you get questions like this. Transcriptions are great, but people make mistakes all the time. And let's not even talk about the census workers. I have a great-grandfather who appears twice on the census in the 1900s. And if we look here, we see John Burso. He was a cook. And here's his parents born in India. And here it is. And that's pretty clearly not Indiana. And then we have people who were labeled mulattoes. They were mixed race, usually black and white. And they used that term till, from what I could find out, until around the 1930s. And then you didn't see that term anymore. And we have a gentleman who was born in Portugal. They left off the Portugal there on the birthplace, another transcription error. And Howard White, who was a hairdresser. And Agnes Carter, who was also a hairdresser. And then I just simply stumbled across this guy one day. If someone had told you there was someone from Arabia born in Bodie, I don't think I would have believed them. And Reuben Raymond, who was a carpenter, and you see that his parents were born in Asia. And we don't know where he was a carpenter. Later census would say, mill worker, and then that would say at the stamp mill, which they called a quartz mill in those days. Now, if he was a carpenter and he worked at one of the mining companies, he would have made quite a bit of money, because carpenters made $5 to $6 a day, skilled labor. So what about everybody else, and where'd they come from? And I've arranged this in order of how many. Our Bodie had a lot of Irish, 720 according to the census. And again, these are, figures that, may not be correct. There may have been a lot more. It's again, 1880 census. And Canada, 462. England, 414. And a lot of those were men from Cornwall. And Scotland, 122. Germany, 106. Mexico, we've talked about 74, maybe 200 at one point. And Sweden, 31. Norway, 2. France, 52. Russia, 24. Switzerland, 20. Portugal 20, Poland 14. That was a new one to me. That was something I just looked up recently. And Chile 9. And that kind of surprised me. I knew that a lot of Chileans came to San Francisco, but probably, I guess not too many of them made it to Bodie, but it was interesting to see them there. Austria 8, Spain 4, Australia 4, and finally Brazil 1. And there may have been a few I haven't found yet. So what's left today to remind us of some of the people we've talked about tonight? Mostly a few ruins, old photos, and newspaper items. And first, take your attention to the left. Everybody see all the brick there? That's the block that you saw earlier, Chinatown. So this is just the ruins. And the clip on the side over here, kind of interesting. I didn't know quite where to put it, but I wanted to show it to you. This is not saying that, they don't hire certain people. The Occidental restaurant, that would have been at the corner of Union and Main, and the best cooked meals in town, and the best of everything, colored help, is in the kitchen. Try and then judge. So I kind of thought that was a positive thing, that they were bragging about what good cooks they had. So I'll let you make up your own mind about that. So the world still comes to Bodie, but it's not the large city of the late 1870s, which we see on the left. The photo on the right shows the remains of the town after the 1932 fire. Its history and the beauty of the remaining buildings attract visitors from not just the United States, but a lot of other countries. And I'm just mentioning a few here: Germany, France, United Kingdom, Czech Republic, and more. And now we can share with them the stories about those who made the long journey over the ocean to seek their fortunes in Bodie. Thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. Okay. Anything in the chat? Uh-oh, audio keeps cutting out. Did everybody hear?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have? First off, Chris, thank you very much for that. That was a wonderful explanation of all about Bodie. I mean, I've been going to Bodie for 30 years now, worked there for 2 or 3 years with you, and all the time I keep finding out new stuff about Bodie and the people who live there. And thank you so much for giving us that presentation. It was just wonderful.
Certainly welcome. I'll keep digging.
Yeah, right. So anybody else have any questions for or
Chris, this is Rich Foy. What's going on in the photograph we see here?
This is another 4th of July event, and this looks like a drilling contest. It's kind of hard to see. These guys are right over here. Yeah, I've always puzzled over this picture, but I like it because everybody looks so fascinated and gathered here, and you see the people up on the balcony. And 4th of July was probably the most popular holiday. I mean, people did not work that day. They went out and played baseball. They went out and watched the horse races. And if you didn't know, Bodie did have a horse racing track. And I have a little homework for you all. If you didn't know that, get your Google Earth out when you finish tonight, and you can see the shape of the racetrack from space.
And everyone's wearing a hat.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. We do have. Can you talk some more about how you do your research? That's from someone called iPhone.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I love doing research, but I have a lot of other duties, and so sometimes it falls by the wayside. But and I don't even have time to do my own genealogy sometimes. And it's one we have access to some Bodie newspapers that we were able to get from a collector. And they are PDF forms and they are very hard to search. So don't ask me to try to find a certain thing. Kind of one way I do research is I look in the books for the date of something, when something happened, and then I search on that date. So I go, the Bodie Free Press seems to be the most interesting paper. Daily Standard News is pretty interesting too, but you see the Free Press quoted quite a bit in the books. And so I can usually find the original article. I like to go to the source to see if there's something more interesting there than was just recounted in the book.
So, Chris, if you look at your chat, there are a number of other questions, including Vivian, who asks, "Hi, do you know of any connection between Dogtown and Bodie? I know there are quite a few Chinese miners there."
Yeah, I know that that was the first place in Mono County where gold was discovered. So that's, that's back in the 1850s. So not really a connection because Bodie really, had people here in the 1860s, but not a lot. And again, it didn't take off till the late 1870s. And that's when all the people came in and you saw this town just appear by magic. A wonderful quote from one of the papers: "The hammer and the buzzsaw can be heard at all hours of the day." They just built and built, beating the snow, get done.
Other accolades pouring in. Lee says, "Excellent presentation, great info." Steve Moore says he has some time frame questions regarding a couple of your slides. Steve, how about unmuting yourself?
Okay, thank you. A great presentation, first off. Fascinated. Anyway, that list on slide number 29 of all the other countries that people had come from, was that at one moment in time, like you mentioned the 1880 census? I was curious, was that all around, or was that at that moment in time, like possibly 1880?
That was 1880. That was everybody that was on the 1880 census.
Oh, interesting. And then my other question, that very interesting ad from the Occidental Hotel, Colored Help in the Kitchen. What was the time frame of that particular ad?
I'm pretty sure that I found that in the collection of papers I have that's from the boom period. So I don't have the year handy right now, but yeah, it was between 1877 and 1881.
And the question regarding the shooting gallery in the background there, this photo.
I don't know a lot about that. I know that it existed, and I know that I guess people went in there and practiced. It seems like that's more of an open air thing to do, but I'm not sure if it was like real guns or what. It's something I've always been curious about, and maybe I'll come back and tell you more about it when I find out something.
And Barbara reports that it was good to see you this morning at Perry Motors.
Yeah,
if
you
it's
too,
not
Barbara.
Bonds, if it's not the Mammoth transfer station, it's Perry Motors.
Yeah. Let's see, is there anything else here I'm trying to... All right.
So, Chris, thank you very much again. I think we've exhausted all the questions in the chat.
Yeah, that's
If
what I
there are
just...
any others, please make yourself known now. Otherwise, thank you. And I would just remind people that our December the 9th meeting will be here in Mono City at our house at 200 Pure Lake Drive, and the information will be coming out in the near future for that. So thank you very much. And Chris, that was just great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, right. Bye.
There is another question up there, I see.
Uh-oh.
Okay, aside from Chinatown, were there areas that immigrants lived separately in Bodie? I don't think so, except for the Chinese. And I've often had visitors ask me, "Oh, was like Chinatown like a ghetto and they weren't allowed out?" And I go, "No, they ordered fruits and vegetables. They went out and wood. No, not at all." And I think one of the books I read, I think it was Roger McGrath's book, and he said it wasn't like they all lived together, and it kind of looked like I looked at the 1900 Chinese, and they seemed to be spread out in different areas. I don't know how much of Chinatown was still there because there was a pretty bad fire down there in 1892. So I guess the answer is no. I don't think that there were separate little areas, there were places they hung out, like the Spanish dance hall. And there was some crime among the Mexicans, usually, with each other. They weren't out shooting white guys. There weren't any conflicts between the white people and the people from Mexico. So, yeah, it seemed like almost like the Mexicans were pretty accepted from the research I did and that I tried to show you in this program. Why the acceptance of the Mexicans but not of the Chinese? Well, people have written lots of essays about this. I guess the Chinese seemed very foreign to them. They ate different food. They looked very different. And yeah, good question. Why? Yeah. Yeah, I see the answer there. The language is a huge factor, not a romance language. Yeah, it was difficult to understand. And I think a lot of the census takers say, I give up talking to this guy. I can't understand him, and they'd leave. And that's why you get counts that are off. Okay, I guess that's it.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. That's been a
Thank you,
wonderful
everybody.
presentation. We all enjoyed it.